History loves a clean beginning, a single spark that ignites a great conflagration. For the Reconquista, many such sparks have been named: a small Christian victory in a mountain pass, a king crowned in exile, a city reclaimed beneath a cross. But the truth is truer to a more complicated rhythm: conquest and collapse, alliance and betrayal, migration and settlement, poetry and massacre. The Reconquista is best understood as a long, uneven process, political, demographic, religious, and cultural, stretching roughly from the shock of 711 to the surrender of Granada in 1492. In the year 711, an army landed near the rock now called Gibraltar, led by Tariq ibn Ziyad, largely Berber soldiers serving under the Umayyad regime that had consolidated power in North Africa. The force moved inland and defeated the Visigothic army at a battle usually named Guadalete. The Visigothic kingdom itself, a successor to late Roman structures, had been weakened by dynastic strife. Within a few years, the Umayyad butler rulers and local notables established Muslim control over most of the peninsula. This new province, Al-Andalus, was not a monolith. It included Arab and Berber armies, local converts, Mali, Christians and Jews who kept their religious communities under dhimmi status, and a shifting elite who sometimes kept Roman Visigothic local practices. The Umayyad presence brought deep administrative and cultural links to the wider Mediterranean and Islamic world. Cities such as Córdoba, Seville, Toledo, initially, and Merida soon took on new life as centers of trade, learning, and craft. The narrative of Christian resistance begins in the north. In the mountain ridges of Asturias, local nobles and churchmen held on. Pelayo, a name later invested with near-mythic power, is the figure surrounding the small victory that tradition dates to c. 722, Covadonga. Modern historians treat the story as a mixture of local resistance and later crafting of a foundation myth. Still, that myth matters. It anchored Christian identity, especially in the centuries when northern polities were tiny and precarious. From Asturias arose a lineage of northern Christian polities. Asturias gave way to León. Castile carved out from it. Navarre persisted across the Pyrenees. Aragon coalesced in the east. These kingdoms were diverse in language, law, and organization. Their advance was not continuous and rarely unified. For long periods, the Christian north was economically weaker than the south, and the political map was a mosaic of counts, bishops, and local strongmen. Yet slowly, the kingdoms engaged in repopulation, organized settlement, and the granting of fueros, local charters, to encourage Christian settlement and repopulate lands. These programs reshaped demography. Villages were planted, fortified towns re-established, and a frontier society of albaniles, builders, shepherds, knights, and clerics emerged. While the north held on, Córdoba blossomed. Abd al-Rahman I, a Umayyad prince who escaped Abbasid slaughter in the east, arrived in 756 and set up an independent emirate. His descendants would consolidate power. Most notable was Abd al-Rahman III, r. 912 to 961, who in 929 declared himself caliph, transforming Córdoba into a polity with imperial pretensions paralleling Baghdad and Cairo. Córdoba became a city of astonishing scope: markets, palaces, baths, libraries. The Great Mosque of Córdoba, built and extended across generations, stood as both a religious center and a civic statement. Scholarship thrived. Physicians, astronomers, philosophers, jurists, and grammarians worked in Arabic but often interacted with Jewish and Christian thinkers. In cities and court circles, Jewish community figures like Hasdai ibn Shaprat and later Samuel ibn Negrillo rose to prominence, participating in administration, trade, and letters. But brilliance can mask tension. The courts were fractious. Ethnic fault lines persisted between Arab and Berber interests. economic inequality remained. From the 10th century onward, military strongmen and court factions periodically destabilized Córdoba, planting seeds for the great rupture to come. By the early 11th century, the Caliphate unraveled. Court rivalries, military rebellions, and competing claims split Córdoba into dozens of small principalities known to historians as the taifas. Taifa rulers often appointed local governors or former administrators to establish independent courts. Seville under the Abbadites, Zaragoza under the Banu Hud, Toledo with its own rulers, and smaller realms in Albarracin, Badajoz, Murcia, and Valencia. The taifas were culturally vibrant but politically weak. Their courts patronized poets, musicians, and artisans, but could not match the military coherence of the northern kingdoms. Facing this vulnerability, many taifas accepted the expedient of paying pariahs tribute to Christian kings in exchange for peace. These payments enriched northern treasuries and funded further expansion. 1085 marks a decisive moment. King Alfonso VI of León, Castile conquered Toledo, the former Visigothic capital and an intellectual hub. Toledo's fall had symbolic weight that seemed to signal a return of Christian authority over central Iberia. In practical consequences, it opened routes into the wealthy agricultural plains of central Spain. But the fall of Toledo alarmed more powerful forces across the straits. The Taifa rulers, threatened by northern advance, appealed to North African allies. From North Africa came two major interventions. The Almoravids, Almoravidan, a Berber reformist movement from the Sahara who had converted to strict Maliki orthodoxy, crossed into Iberia at the invitation of Taifa rulers. Led by commanders such as Yusuf ibn Tashfin, they defeated Castilian forces at the Battle of Sagrajas, Zalaca, 1086, and for a while restored a measure of unity and orthodox rule. Yet Almoravid control brought new tensions. Their stricter social code clashed with the cosmopolitan tastes of Andalusi elites. By the mid-12th century, the Almoravid state itself weakened. A new movement, the Almohads, Almohadin, emerged. Founded by Ibn Tumurt, the Almohads fused radical reformist theology with military vigor. Under leaders like Abd al-Mumin and later Yaqub al-Mansur, the Almohads built a powerful trans-Mediterranean empire. The Almohads halted Christian advance militarily at times, culminating in the Battle of Alarcos, 1195, where the Castilian king Alfonso VIII suffered a severe defeat. But the Almohads overextended. Their defeat at Las Navas de Tolosa, 1212, where a coalition of Christian kings led by Alfonso VIII and supported by European crusaders and a papal banner, decisively broke Almohad predominance in Iberia. The 1212 battle is often treated as a watershed. After it, southern Muslim polities lacked the means to halt Christian expansion for good. As Muslim power fractured after Las Navas, Christian kingdoms expanded rapidly. Key cities fell. Córdoba, 1236, and Seville, 1248, were taken by Ferdinand III of Castile, a pious and effective monarch who would be canonized. Portugal, which had separated from León, Castile, and consolidated under kings like Afonso Henriquez, seized Lisbon, 1147, with the aid of crusading fleets, establishing itself as a maritime power. A distinctive institutional innovation of this period was the rise of military orders. Warrior monks who combined monastic vows with the defense and settlement of frontier lands. Orders such as Santiago, Calatrava, Alcántara, and Montesa received lands, castles, and privileges. They played crucial roles in frontier warfare and colonization. The Templars and Hospitallers were also present, though Iberian orders tended to dominate local frontier organization. The Reconquista also generated legal and social instruments to govern newly settled territories. Fueros, local charters, granted rights and privileges to settlers. Consejos, municipal councils, organized repopulation, and defense. This patchwork of charters produced diverse legal customs, but a shared ethos. The frontier would be defended, settled, and integrated into Christian polities. As Christian fortunes rose, a new Muslim polity was born in the southernmost mountains and plains, the Nasrid Kingdom of Granada. Muhammad Ibn Nasr founded the dynasty in 1238, and for centuries, Granada survived through a combination of diplomatic skill, tribute payments, pariahs, and occasional internal alliances with Christian rulers. Granada's survival was also cultural. The Alhambra, a palace fortress complex in Granada's hills, became the most visible testimony to Nasrid artistry. Intricate stucco, poetic inscriptions, water channels, and geometric gardens. Granada remained a center of scholarship, song, and artisanry. Its elites continued Arabic literary and scientific traditions even as political space contracted. Granada's status was ambivalent. It was a vassal to Castile for long stretches, and its emigrant networks kept links to North Africa. Internally, factionalism and palace intrigue were constant dangers. Externally, the Christian kingdoms increasingly coordinated. Over the 14th and 15th centuries, Castile and Aragon consolidated internally by subduing internal nobles, reforming finances, and centralizing monarchical power, developments that would eventually provide the resources needed to besiege Granada itself. Throughout the Reconquista, Iberia remained multi-confessional. Jews, sometimes in positions of influence as administrators, translators, and financiers, lived in both Muslim and Christian realms. In Christian lands, they could serve as royal chancellors or in tax offices. In Muslim lands, Jewish viziers and poets walked court corridors. But these positions could be precarious. Mozarabs, Christians living under Muslim rule, kept older liturgical and legal customs while often adopting Arabic language and urban manners. Mujars Muslims who remained under Christian rule lived under a legal framework that recognized Islamic law in personal matters but political subordination to Christian rulers. Over time, the social categories blurred further. Converts from Judaism, conversos, and Islam, Moriscos in later centuries, complicated the religious map. Yet coexistence was not permanent peace. Periodic violence occurred. Pogroms, forced conversions, and expulsions punctuated periods of relative tolerance. Tensions also rose as new ideas, reformist religious movements in North Africa, crusading fervor from the papacy, or social pressures from noble demands, reshaped attitudes. One of the great long-term legacies of the Iberian centuries is cultural transmission. Arabic texts of classical authors, Aristotle, Galen, Ptolemy, reached the Latin West often through Toledo's school of translators in the 12th to 13th centuries. Scholars like Gerard of Cremona translated works from Arabic into Latin, reintroducing lost knowledge of medicine, astronomy, and philosophy to Western Europe. Jewish scholars and Mozarabic bilinguals often mediated these exchanges. Agricultural practices likewise traveled. Sophisticated irrigation techniques, cannet-type wells, acequias, new crops, rice, sugarcane, citrus fruits, and agronomic knowledge transformed Andalusian and later Iberian productivity. Material culture, architectural forms, ornamentation, metalwork, and textiles blended styles that would become recognizably Mediterranean Iberian. The Mudéjar style fuses Islamic ornamentation with Christian building forms. Even language absorbed this contact. Spanish, Castilian, would adopt thousands of words of Arabic origin, such as acequia, alcazar, azucar, and alcalde, visible in everyday speech. In the late 15th century, the crowns of Castile and Aragon came under the joint rule of Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon. They pursued dynastic centralization, subjugating great nobles, reforming finances, and building a coalition of church and state. The Granada War began in 1482. It was a decade-long combination of sieges, border raids, internecine Nasrid fratricidal conflict, and diplomatic pressure. Ferdinand and Isabella sought Granada not merely for territory, but for symbolic completion, to end Muslim sovereignty on the peninsula and to unify peninsular Christianity under a single crown. The Nasrid ruler Muhammad XII, Boabdil, whose political life was tangled with family rivalries and shifting loyalties, surrendered Granada on January 2nd. 1492, after the negotiated capitulations of Granada, November 1491, which guaranteed in principle religious toleration and property rights for Muslims. These clauses were later eroded and revoked in part by successive policies of forced conversion and inquisitorial pressure. As the Muslim banners were struck and the keys handed over, an era closed. Simultaneously, these monarchs sponsored oceanic ventures whose consequences would dwarf even the Reconquista in global reach. The end of the Reconquista did not produce peaceful assimilation. 1492 also saw the Alhambra decree ordering Jewish expulsion from Castile and Aragon. Tens of thousands chose exile, many moving to the Ottoman Empire, North Africa, or parts of Italy. Others converted, producing generations of conversos whose social position remained contested. For Muslims, the early years after Granada's fall initially preserved some rights under the capitulations, but pressure mounted. Forced conversions, public humiliation, and legal impositions. By 1502, Castilian Muslims were ordered to convert or leave. Later, many so-called Moriscos, Muslims who had converted, often insincerely, lived under suspicion. The 17th century witnessed the mass expulsions of Moriscos, 1609 to 1614, an event that decimated communities, especially in Valencia and Murcia. The energies of the Iberian crowns did not dissipate after Granada. They redirected outward. The same monarchs who closed the Iberian frontier financed Christopher Columbus's voyage in 1492. Portugal's maritime push, earlier catalyzed by figures like Henry the Navigator and by its own reconquest successes, the Algarve in 1249, led both Iberian crowns into an age of Atlantic expansion, colonial conquest, and the creation of empires that would reshape the globe. So what did the Reconquista accomplish, and what did it destroy? It created new polities, Spain and Portugal, and it established institutions that would underpin early modern state formation: centralized monarchies, standing armies, fiscal innovations, and legal codification. It stimulated the formation of military orders, new urban institutions, and a frontier culture that valorized martial prowess. But the cost was immense. Centuries of coexistence, however unequal, gave way to an early modern insistence on religious uniformity. The expulsions and forced conversions of the late 15th and early 16th centuries erased communities that had been integral to Iberian economic, intellectual, and cultural life. The social trauma of inquisitions and persecutions reverberated for generations. And yet, architecture and art, language and law, agriculture and science all bear the imprint of those centuries of contact. The Spanish language, its vocabulary and poetic cadence, carries voices from Arabic. The Alhambra, the mosque, cathedral of Córdoba, the Mudéjar churches and synagogues are physical palimpsests, strata of memory visible in stone. Perhaps the best way to understand the Reconquista is as a long process of layering, conquering and settling, translating and transmitting, excluding and absorbing. It was an engine of state formation and empire, but also a crucible of cultural hybridity. Its moral complexity resists a single narrative. Heroism sits beside cruelty, learning beside ignorance, coexistence beside expulsions. The Reconquista lasted longer than many modern nations have existed. It was not merely the taking of fortresses and cities. It was a transformation of people, economies, language, and faith, a long conversation that sometimes raised its voice to violence. If history prefers tidy endings, the Reconquest offers none. After 1492, one new story begins. He oversees empires, the age of exploration. But beneath it remain the echoes of 8 centuries where the Iberian Peninsula was, in equal measure, an arena of clash and a crucible of synthesis. To walk today across Córdoba's arches or Granada's courts is to step into those layered worlds. The stones remember, the language remembers, and history asks us to remember the complexities, to hold both the beauty and the brutality of that long, difficult process.